The scenario piece for me is, from an insurance point of view, the most important. So it also gives you the ability to look at how much limit you may want to buy from a quantification point of view, and making sure that the coverage that you get is fit for your organisation and not something that's just off the shelf.
Welcome to the Risk Ready Recipes podcast series, where we serve up insights at the intersection of risk management and insurance in the food and beverage industry. Whether you're a manufacturer, producer or distributor, our goal is to equip you with the knowledge and tools to navigate risk with confidence, so you can focus on what you do best. Hello and welcome to today's podcast. Today's focus is on cyber-risk, a growing threat which can disrupt production, compromise supply chains, and even put food safety at risk. With increasing digitalization, from automated production lines to connected logistics, the sector has become an attractive target for cybercriminals. I'm really pleased to be joined today by my colleagues Ian Cairns and Matt Ellis from our specialist cyber team. In this episode, we'll explore the cyber vulnerabilities in food and beverage manufacturing and the practical steps you can take to strengthen resilience. Matt, can we start by discussing the recent history of cyber attacks on food and beverage businesses, please?
Yeah, hi Sue, and hello everybody. And I think if we start from the top, we're all aware that there are many different sectors in the food and beverage space, and this ranges from production to processing and also distribution, as Sue has mentioned. And there have been a number of attacks impacting business operations across the globe in all of these areas, and they've impacted different organisations, from cooperatives, breweries, and dairy operations in Europe, North America and other geographies. But also you need to consider the other sectors within the food and beverage space around farming, how it might impact elements such as animal welfare, and in fact, even in one instance recently, it's contributed to the death of some livestock in Switzerland due to some failures in the monitoring of that livestock following a cyber event. So there's an awful lot going on in this space. If we look at the US, for example, there's been some recent supply chain disruption over there, and there were even reports that the hacker group Scattered Spider, which Ian may mention later, has moved on from the UK retailer attacks into the US, and including food production as part of their target list, if you like. The other things to mention, I suppose, is sort of where production sits in the chain, not only from a supply point of view, but also in the way that the production or breweries or farming supplies their customers, and how an impact at the end customer could influence the way that you're able to distribute your produce or your stock. So a cyber event happens at a retailer and they cannot take your product, for example. How is that going to impact you?
And in terms of why the food and beverage sector has become a target, and clearly we have seen a lot of attacks on the sector, can you speak a little bit about why it has become a target? Perhaps this is one for Ian to kick off.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. When we start looking at the food and beverage sector, it's so vast. There's a lot of household brands in there. And so therefore, if you have a cyber attack and your aim of the individual group conducting the attack, your aim is to raise your profile, to get yourself some notoriety, then obviously the food and beverage sector works very well. You can gain some real traction in news cycles and news outlets. But also the other thing as well is that they see it as maybe a sector that doesn't invest quite as heavily in their cyber controls as maybe something like financial services would. So therefore, there may be more opportunity there to gain access to systems when they shouldn't be, if we're talking about malicious bad actors. But also, I think the attraction comes because there could be challenges that are presented there. There could be some very niche, bespoke operational technology used in food processing plants, within bottling, canning, whatever it may be, that can prove as an interesting challenge, because they want the challenge to relieve boredom, to prove to their friends they're a better hacker than their friend may be. I also think we start looking at the supply chain piece, and it might not be directly attacking the food and beverage manufacturer, but it could be maybe attacking the company that supplies your glass bottles. And actually, if they lost their glass furnace, what would the so what be? How long would it take for you to use an alternative supplier to meet demand? Do you have to slow down your own production? What does that mean for your onward, sale of a product? All these things where we may not, in isolation, it may not seem like a big issue, but actually the knock-on effect and the tail of it could be huge. And that becomes a bigger concern, I would say, is, as Matt alluded to, is the supply chain.
Yeah, and Ian, I just wanted to add on this as well that with the food and beverage industry, you have the added challenge and the pressure on production for things like contamination, public health, and spoilage, which is often pulled into the public eye. As you mentioned, the notoriety element of hackers as well. So there's this added level of complexity and consideration that this industry has, especially when you move further down the chain to the public side and the public view of each brand.
Yeah, and that's absolutely a valid point, Matt, is what reputational damage does it do to you for this having a cyber attack? Does the reputational damage put doubt in the consumer's mind over the quality of your product? Is it safe? Has it been contaminated? And this all feeds, this all feeds into the consumer mind. And sometimes there might not actually be a problem, but then we come back to the messaging and handling of a cyber incident. And if you leave a void, someone will fill it. And in the world of social media, someone will absolutely find time to fill it for you.
And in terms of how you see these attacks typically unfolding, Ian, when you've dealt with them, what typically happens as these attacks occur?
The two main vectors that we would see an attack occurring is, one of them is a misconfiguration of an IT service control product, and so it's been maybe exposed to the internet when it shouldn't be, or there hasn't been mature enough controls in place to monitor the activity on it. And so that could be someone could find a router or a switch that's exposed to the internet that still uses the manufacturer's default password, and from there they would then look to log in. It could be some kind of service as a software solution where people have used a weak password or they've reused the password, and we don't have MFA in place, that kind of control to prevent unauthorized access. So someone can easily get in that way, potentially look to then escalate credentials or steal other people's credentials who have greater permissions. The other typical vector we would see would be from the social engineering side. This, as Matt alluded to, scatter spiders. They've had quite a successful year in 2025, unfortunately, from a lot of industries. But by being, English-speaking Western Europeans, North American individuals phoning up help desks, impersonating genuine employees, then use that to get people's passwords reset, maybe get MFA tokens reset, which then allows them to log in with a genuine credential, which can then make detecting malicious activity very difficult for cybersecurity defense teams. And it gives them that lateral movement around an organization. So therefore they can then start stealing information. They could potentially start modifying how operational technologies performing its role. They could tamper with data, as Matt alluded to earlier, the deaths of livestock in Switzerland, and that was ransomware, which led to that. And again, once they're into the system, lock up data, steal data, cause issues with systems. They may not have the intended effect of what the attacker wanted, but certainly they cause disruption. It makes the news, and unintentionally they may get a high profile from that.
Sure. And obviously we've seen an increase in automation in food production, all aspects of food production over recent years, and that's continuing and growing. And also the use of AI now in production, logistics and supply chain systems. How does this change in use of technology impact upon that risk, that cyber risk?
I think if we tackle AI, the AI element first is to be mindful when we're talking about artificial intelligence. It is not just your co-pilots, ChatGPT, that generative AI piece. There is also the artificial intelligence used for logistic companies to plan routes most efficiently. So therefore they need the least number of vehicles, use the least fuel, maximize how they're doing this. Previously, it would have been maybe a group of people working in a room together, planning routes, and now it is handed over to AI. So there is the risk there that maybe the logistics side doesn't work quite as smoothly because there's something tampered with the AI, or maybe the AI does something unexpected because it's working to the parameters the user sets it versus coming up with its own idea. With regards to what that would then look like for the production side of things, if you can't get a product out because the logistics side of things isn't working, does that become spoil? Is that, a wasted product? But then also, if you can't get product in, what would that look like again? Because then do you have to shut down production lines? When we look at the automation piece, is there a risk that the production line, if someone tampers with the automation, does the production line do something unexpected? What does the shutdown restart process look like of some of these production lines? Because some of them can be incredibly difficult to shut down and bring back online quickly. And so therefore we need to considering if we have to bring a production line to a halt, do we have a good plan and process in place to bring it back online? Can we just slow the production line down versus completely shutting it down?
Yeah, and I think we've seen examples of companies which have had their entire production shut down, sometimes for quite lengthy periods. So financial impact, reputational impact, and an impact on their customers and suppliers, I guess. Obviously, very serious when it happens. So could you talk a little bit about risk management, Ian, and can we talk about some of the practical risk management measures that businesses should be either taking or considering taking?
Yeah, from a risk management point of view, having a list of your critical systems and understanding which are your critical systems, that also then would extend out to your critical suppliers, and so who is critical within your supply chain. Maybe consider customers as well, depending on the size of the organization. If you have a customer who takes 75% of your produce end product, does that pose a risk to you if they said, well, we can't take anything for a couple of weeks because we've experienced a cyber attack? And then with that, the due diligence work that comes with it. So understanding what controls are in place at what supplier, what contractual obligations can you put in place. Rights to audit springs to mind. It's always a good one to be able to check and go and see what is actually happening there. Yeah, I think that would be really important. But also, it's a bit like you can't really build a house without the foundations, and a lot of the time the governance piece is really important. So having the policies, procedures, processes in place to allow all this activity to take place. Sometimes we can see people try and put some really good processes in place, but there isn't actually a policy underlying it, and so that governance piece then, without actually being defined what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, sometimes that falls apart a little bit. I don't know what Matt's take on risk management processes would be.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I agree with everything that you've said on this. Really, I think the preparation piece from a risk management side of things and making sure the right stakeholders know what the actions are if there was to be a cyber event, whether that's a malicious event, a hacker, or even a sort of a system failure type event that causes a shutdown of a production plant or something in the logistics chain and so on. So I think understanding that and really looking at scenarios that are unique to your business and how your business operates, and using those scenarios not only in this development of how you manage your risk, but also when we come on to talk a little bit about cyber insurance, these scenarios will be important to use when you look at the way that your insurance could respond here, or how you mitigate these potential scenarios. Are very useful in all sorts of ways, whether that the insurance side of things or what your potential loss could be, how you look at your mitigations, how you look at responding to the different scenarios so that you don't impact the way that your business operates, or you have as limited impact as possible.
So Matt, could you take us on to consider cyber insurance and what cyber insurance covers, please? And also, could you talk a little bit about what support cyber insurance provides to clients in the event of an incident as well?
Yeah, of course, Sue. So cyber insurance, when you're considering cyber insurance and how you might want to place a program, or even whether it's something that you want to move forward with, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, building out your scenarios is a really important element to this, because it not only helps you with understanding how much limit you might want or how you want to structure your retentions, but it also enables your broker or the cyber policy to sort of, for you to really understand where cover may exist, or that your broker can build for you within your policy. So generally speaking, the coverage that you would receive from a cyber insurance policy falls into two main buckets, if you like. You have your liability, which is predominantly around your responsibilities over the data that you hold for consumers or for clients, for customers, and also your employees. Includes things like the liability you might have if you inadvertently pass a virus or a piece of ransomware from you to one of your consumers, or to a business partner, one of your suppliers. And then on the second half of the coin, you have your first party costs, which would likely be the most important element for a food and beverage company operating in this space of sort of the business to business space, where you would receive cover for an interruption that is caused by a cyber event, and then that can be caused either through hacking, sort of a malicious event, or even if your IT systems or your operational technology systems were to go down through sort of what's sometimes known as an unplanned outage. And this would be your loss of profit for that period of time that you're out. And it can also include costs for mitigating that loss. So if, for example, you need to move your warehousing to a different location, or you need to move your production to a different location, those sort of costs can be included there. You can also get costs covered or replacement hardware for what's known as bricking cover. So if somebody was to lock up your IT systems or your systems, and it's actually cheaper to replace the laptop or the desktop or the server or whatever it might well be, you can get those replaced instead of going through the additional costs of trying to get an expert in to unlock it, because it's more expensive to do that than to buy the new hardware. The third element that comes into cyber insurance policies, as Stu mentioned, is this support piece. And this is where insureds find an awful lot of value, because you don't just get the forensic support, but you also get your legal advice, and you can get even more specialist advice around things like ransomware. So ransomware experts will come in and talk to you about what's happening. They'll give you advice around who the bad actors are, the likelihood of you being able to recover your systems, what the likelihood is of these people being honourable, if you like, for a better term. It's honour amongst thieves. It used to be a lot more prevalent within the hacking community that if they said they were going to destroy the data, they would usually destroy the data. There's been a trend recently where this isn't happening as much as it used to be. So when a bad actor turns around and says, right, you pay us X amount of money and we'll unlock your system, and we'll also give you back your data and destroy the data, there are occasions where they are not following through on that word, and then they come back and they ask you for more money at a later date because they haven't destroyed that data like they originally said they would. But you'd get all sorts of advice around this. You'd also get additional services like public relations specialists to help you manage the message both internally and externally, and various other things like platforms to help you have secure communication when you're down, because you don't know when a bad actor is sitting in your system and listening to your communications. So certain insurers nowadays and certain third-party providers can give you these offline platforms or these out-of-band platforms that enable you to communicate securely, so that you can manage the way that your process and how you're dealing with the event is kept between the people that need to know about it. Probably the main elements to summarize that. Ian, I don't know if there's anything you needed to touch on around the ransomware piece and the advice that you can get around that?
I think it's difficult with the ransomware piece. We are seeing more of that double, triple extortion going on because it's a way of making more money. I think it's always important that you maybe have a policy in place as an organisation. You've made a decision on what you're willing to do in that scenario, but be mindful that if you come up with a number, don't save it on the computer, somewhere in your IT networks. That then gives the malicious actors a definitive guide to how much you're willing to pay. It's difficult to know what is the right decision to make as far as ransomware goes and payments and recovering data, etc., because it will be different for every business and it will be unique in every situation. And I think it's just worth having a discussion whether you'd have a policy as a business to pay or not to pay before the worst case happened.
Yeah, so it's not quite as straightforward as that, but yes, there is cover for the ransom payment under a cyber policy, but it has to be where it is you're legally allowed to do so. There's also all sorts of things to take into consideration to do with sanctions, about who you're paying, the attribution element of who is requesting that ransom, and where that money ultimately ends up, so it's not going somewhere that funds terrorism and those types of things. But there is cover for that ransom payment, and there's also help to make that ransom payment, so the setting up of Bitcoin wallets and bits and pieces along those lines. But each circumstance needs to be taken under its own merit, and different geographies as well have different views on the settlement of ransom demands, whether it's legally allowed or it's not allowed. And I know that there's obviously been a recent discussion in the UK about the settlement of ransom for certain industries. So there's having the right people in the room to advise you at that time for that specific situation is really important. It all comes out in the underwriting process about what you've done if you've been impacted before, whether it's still part of that same event. There's lots of considerations around that, how long they've been in the system for, and obviously if you've already had one event and you were insured for that, how much, and it happens again in the same year, how much limit you've got left. But there's all sorts of different things that you can buy to protect yourself or to give you more protection from a limit point of view, things like reinstatements and so on and so forth. But speaking to your broker about what the best way of structuring a program around this potential second event or a continuation of the first event, and advice around that is your broker is going to be the best person to talk to you about your unique scenarios, if you like.
To finish off, could we have a piece of advice from each of you if you were to focus on either one or a couple of things that you would advise businesses to be doing?
From my point of view, one of the key elements that an organisation needs to look at is their scenarios that I mentioned a little bit earlier on. So really understanding how a cyber event could impact your organisation really gives you that foundation to then go forward and look at the ability to understand where you currently have cyber cover, because you may have cover under existing insurances in your portfolio. You can then understand these gaps and then look at any overlaps that you may have. You can look to mitigate or fill those gaps with suitable insurance, and make sure that you're not paying for sort of dual insurance in two places. Everybody's got budgets that they need to adhere to. So the scenario piece for me is, from an insurance point of view, the most important. It also gives you the ability to look at how much limit you may want to buy from a quantification point of view, and making sure that the coverage that you get is fit for your organisation and not something that's just off the shelf.
From my point of view, I would recommend understanding where your risks are. Have a clear, concise cyber risk register that is reviewed often. And then once you understand what your risks are, then use something like a crisis management workshop to actually test the response to them risks and understand who has the roles and responsibilities for each action, what that would look like, what the impact may be on the business if we have to take decisions, because it's better to have that consideration in a realistic environment, albeit slow time, versus having to make a decision in a very emotive-driven environment when this happens for real, and decisions could, be people's livelihoods. Potentially, it could even result in the business ceasing to exist, which we have seen. There was a haulage company last year that had an issue with ransomware through phishing, and after 150 years in business, the haulage company went out of business because, unfortunately, there wasn't a plan in place. There wasn't that incident response. They didn't know how they would respond and what that would look like. Ended up the business being folded. So having that plan is really important, and testing it. And the best way to test it is through things like crisis management workshops.
That brings us to the end of today's podcast. Thanks to Matt and to Ian for your insights, and to you for joining us. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please subscribe, rate and share this podcast. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you for listening to this podcast from Willis, a WTW business. The information in this podcast is believed to be accurate at the date of publication. This information may have subsequently changed or have been superseded and should not be relied upon to be accurate or suitable after this date. This podcast offers a general overview of its subject matter. It does not necessarily address every aspect of its subject or every product available in the market. It is not intended to be and should not be used to replace specific advice relating to individual situations. We do not offer, and this should not be taken as legal, accounting or tax advice. If you intend to take action or make any decision on the basis of the content of this publication, you should first seek specific advice from an appropriate professional. Some of the information in this publication may be compiled from third-party sources we consider to be reliable. However, we do not guarantee and are not responsible for the accuracy of such. The views expressed are not necessarily those of Willis Towers Watson. For further authorization and regulatory details about our Willis Towers Watson legal entities operating in your country, please refer to our Willis Towers Watson website. It is a regulatory requirement for us to consider our local licensing requirements.